The last question type that we're going to be talking about is the one that is best suited for that highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. That's the complete student creation area, where you really show you understand this by doing your own analysis, your own study. So this is something that is used exclusively for these. You're not really going to use it for those first couple of levels, partly because a lot of these times it's just 1 or 2 word answers and you can't get an essay out of them. Another reason that you wait for the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy to ask this way is just because they take the most amount of your teacher's time and attention to actually mark and evaluate. So just to manage our own workloads, we tend to use them when nothing else will do the job. So if you're in the humanities, you see a lot of analysis essays, compare and contrast. Those tend to be the long answers. So they're basically, the long answers are exclusively for levels 4 and up, and are more and more likely to be at those upper levels where you're really thinking about things at the deepest level. So again, you want to make sure your spelling and grammar are nice and strong. Even if your teacher says that they're not going to be marking on that, if the teacher has to stop and try to figure out what you're actually trying to say because the patterns of letters on the page might be making words, but that pattern of words doesn't make a sentence, if we have to try and interpret that sentence because we don't recognize it as English or whatever language you're supposed to be writing in, well, even if we're not intentionally marking spelling and grammar, it's going to impact your grade because we're not completely certain of what it is that you're saying. And it's taking that much effort to interpret what you're reading, or interpret what you wrote that we are reading. So you, again, want to be organized. You want to avoid the babbling that we talked about before. Right? You can babble on for 5 pages, but a 5-page babble on is not necessarily going to solve anything. What you want to do is show that you have a clear grasp. You're actually better to write a concise 3 pages than a babbling 5. Because if you could pack all the content and get the whole point across in 3 pages, and most students are doing it in 5 even when they do understand it, that shows that you do understand the concept and you can dig down to the deepest levels and get there faster and convey it with more clarity and less meandering between topics, and you can get right to the meat and bones of it. So that is something that is quite easy to look at and something that you really want to take a look at. Make sure that you've got this understood and that you know what is going on. So these are a lot of the key features of this. So one of the ways that you can do this, especially if you know an essay is coming, particularly in the humanities, you should be asking yourself, what are the themes that we've been exploring this semester? Right? What are the common threads between the stories? When you're asked to compare and contrast them, what do they have in common? I mean, yeah, if you're looking at high school English, there is a very good likelihood that your lead character ends the story dead and or insane, but you need more detail than that. Why did they end up in this position? What were the chains of dominoes that brought them to this point? Right? What morals can you take? What could that character have done to have avoided the terrible fate? These are often the themes that we're looking at. So that's what you want to dig in and explore. So before you go in, find those common bonds. Now, another tip that is primarily useful when you're looking at English, there's a list of approved materials that you can find online. So you can go to Alberta's websites, just search for Alberta Education and look at the resources for teachers. You don't need to log in for that. And they will give you a list of approved resources. Now, what I strongly recommend is that you look for Shakespeare or some other authors that have shown up time and time again, especially those on past diplomas. You find a list of all the works of Shakespeare that are approved for use in class in 10, 20, or 30. And you want to stick with the -1 stream or -2 stream, whichever test you're going to be writing. And then go online and find, say, the complete works of Shakespeare, which are now in the public domain. You can get them at Project Gutenberg, which is a great resource for public domain books. Compare the two. If you notice that there are 2 to 3 plays that teachers are not permitted to use in class, ask yourself why not. Go online, explore the themes, research these plays. Find out if either of them have the themes that you guys have been discussing all semester. They might be omitted because they're just not relevant to the themes they've chosen to focus on in your English courses. They might have been omitted not because they're irrelevant, but because the province wants to try and make sure that they are unfamiliar to you when you sit down and write the diploma, so that they can give you excerpts that you'll be reading for the first time. But if that's the case, you can find them on Project Gutenberg. You can research and explore the themes and find out what they're talking about. So if you see clips from these unfamiliar plays, or in Shakespeare's cases, they love to give you sonnets because those are complete and packaged, and he wrote so many of them that you're probably not going to memorize them all. But if they're giving you excerpts from plays and you've already done some legwork to know what are the themes of that play, what should I be looking for, it will help you pick out the evidence for that in the text. Give you a leg up to help you organizing your thoughts and to work things through. Now, one thing that you should never do is just trust a movie adaptation or a summary. Reading the summaries before the diploma when you don't know for sure what's on it is an effective way to get some useful prep work without wasting all of your time. But if you're talking about an essay that's assigned for you to take home and turn in 2 to 3 weeks or a month, you do not want to depend on the movie adaptations or the summaries, because I can pretty much guarantee you your teachers have also done that legwork. They have also made sure that they've watched these movies and read the summaries, and they will be looking for details that summaries get wrong, or the movies change, or the movies omit. Right? You don't want to depend on someone else's interpretation, because you cannot guarantee that's going to be faithful to the story. Always go back to the original source, just like we did when we were doing our citations and our bibliographies in yesterday's video series. And with those original sources behind you, then you can properly prepare. Now, again, Project Gutenberg, so it will be tied to LibriVox, which will give you audiobook versions of most, if not all, of the content that's going to be showing up in class. So if reading itself is a chore or a struggle, you have a hard time doing it and it's easier to listen, you do have that option. LibriVox does require that its readers adhere strictly to the text with 0 deviations whatsoever. They will make you re-record it if you stumble or change anything. It won't be uploaded unless their beta listeners have listened, compared, and said, yeah, this is good, this is accurate. So keep in mind, it may not be perfect, but it will give you a help if you can't read it yourself. It's always best to read it, because if you're reading and you start to daydream, you can usually go back and remember the paragraph you started on when you were reading and started daydreaming and go forward. LibriVox, it can be hard to figure out how far to go back, and the typical reaction is to just keep listening, and then you've missed that key point. So it's always best to read the original source at least once, but there are alternatives if you absolutely must use them.